Hello from the other side of the world. If you have no idea what I'm talking about right now, this is a brand new set. If you want to know why that happened, here's a video that explains a little bit about why. And this video is going to explain why it's been a little bit of an adjustment period bringing myself to Melbourne, Australia from Denver, Colorado. Let's be real, I wouldn't be this channel, this wouldn't be socially constructed.online if I didn't explain my entire move using social scientific principles. So throughout this video, we're going to explain all of my personal experiences, trials, and tribulations moving to a new place within the context of the intercultural theory, W-curve theory. We're going to use W-curve theory in order to explain what has happened on the channel over the course of the previous several months. I do need to mention, however, that this video includes a lot of discussion about mental health through trying times and vast different changes in an individual's life. So in addition to that trigger warning, I also want to mention that this video is being sponsored by an underwriter to the channel that could not have been more instrumental in making sure I maintained my sanity over at Shit You Don't Want to Talk About. Shit You Don't Want to Talk About is all about bringing to light a lot of discussions that people would prefer not to bring up in regular conversation, but that have to be discussed if we're going to be able to unbottle a lot of these concepts and create change in our virtual communities. I would like to start this narrative back in 2016. I found myself going to New Zealand and Australia in order to study international media. As a part of this, I hopped over to Auckland, New Zealand, and then down to Wellington, across to Melbourne, and then up to Sydney. It was originally a very short thing, but while I was there, I discovered a researcher, Erica Pearson, in Wellington, New Zealand, who specializes in education using online contexts. Because she focused primarily on this more communal aspect, I wanted nothing more than to learn from her. I actually went to Wellington, New Zealand for 9 months in order to study intercultural communication, business, and virtual worlds with Erica Pearson, Sharon Marsden, and a few other crew members. As a study abroad student, my experiences were really tumultuous. There was never really a point where the roller coaster of ups and downs went away. When we went into that process, we were told exactly what we were going to go through. Following a series of intercultural discussions after World War II, international studies became the hot button topic for international communication, for anthropology, sociology, and the like. This was the first time we found ourselves in an intercultural and global world. It is in this context, in the early 1960s to the late 1990s, that we developed a theory, U-curve theory, which is the concept of how culture shock functions. People come from a host culture where things are done in a specific way. They go into another culture where they are shocked to discover that things work differently. And then once they get to a certain point, they start to feel comfortable. A lot of people describe it as floating on the physical ground where they are. Oftentimes, it creates so much backlash that people will get fired and then sent back to their home countries. Understanding the psychological impact that a move like that has needs to be understood if an individual is going to be able to do work and respect their mental, social, and physical well-being as they do it. Over the course of decades, we've noticed that that's a super simple way to view things. It's really a roller coaster that doesn't ever stop, just like my experience in New Zealand. W-curve theory starts first and foremost with you and your home culture expecting to move to another one. It's very rare, if ever, that we end up in a different culture we weren't expecting before, unless it's just like a small micro thing. A person walking through San Francisco suddenly finds themselves in Chinatown or the Mission District. The city just changed on them and the cultures are completely different. It's this kind of minute clash that forces us to change our behaviors. And if we don't catch on to it, people start to feel like we're a little bit rude. Now, let's take a person who's not just moving from a standard area of San Francisco into Chinatown. Let's actually move them from America to China. Effectively, as you come in, the world around you is going to look new and interesting. You've noticed that there's a heightened situational awareness involved with all of the different changes. But at a certain point in time, that overflux of change is going to make things slightly apparent or irritating. you're going to discover so many changes that you have to roll the punches with that you might start to get a bit frustrated. Why didn't I know this before? Why wasn't I able to predict this? Why is it this way when this is a much easier approach? All of these different changes are going to create significant problems for you being able to adapt. But as soon as you do, you start to feel normal. You start to feel like the people around you. The environment starts to feel a little bit more like it's accepting you. You start to feel like you're home. And as things start to feel normal, you can't help but compare the way that you're living now with the way that you were living before. As you realize all of the things that you've lost in that environment, you start to crave a little bit more of the way things were. You get giddy about wanting that American hamburger one more time because you just can't find a good burger in this current place. You start to feel listless or depressed, and all of those things you lost, you have to mourn now. In the case of 2017 me, I knew that my study abroad was only going to last about 9 months. Merely catching up was capable of dealing with my homesickness really quite handedly, cooking a lot more, having better public transit, having a much better environment. I didn't have to deal with snow as frequently or as often. And then there were the people that I grew attached to in New Zealand. So when I went back to the United States, I was incredibly shocked that I would go through this entire process all over again. We call this second process the re-enculturation, which is when you come back to your home country and it starts to feel just as foreign as the place that you had gone to. You find that you have to fall back into customs. And there are some habits that once removed from them, you were happy they had gone down. But because you're in an environment that is familiar again and it reinforces those habits, you start to get the notion that, oh, you do need to eat more fast food. Oftentimes your friends haven't actually changed their habits because they didn't move to a different environment. So you start to realize that you're falling back into old patterns. You start to feel listless for the place where things were different. And that culturation process occurs again. Having moved to Australia, 5 years I'm going to be here, things are a lot more extreme. I knew in July that I had the potential to be accepting this PhD, which would move me internationally all the way to Australia. The actual move was going to happen in January or February of the following year. So I had about 7 months to prepare for what I knew was going to be the W curve. Having experience going from the United States to New Zealand, it allowed me to prepare for the fact that I was going to be moving into a different culture. There is also something to be said for the fact that I was going from a Western country with huge imperial influence on the cultures of other countries around the world into Australia, where the culture would be really quite similar to what I had in the United States. That meant that as I could research and study with Australia, I knew what was going to be new and interesting. I could study jargon, and I could start saying mate more, and I could start talking to Australian people about lingo and language a little bit better. I should point out that I experienced a tremendous amount of issues as we moved up into packing and getting ready to go. I started feeling like I was losing my entire life because this 5-year process was impending doom. My entrance into Australia was aggravating. As soon as I arrived, I discovered that the home that I had set up, the apartment that I had paid for ahead of getting here, had actually fallen through. So I spent a full 2 weeks thinking that I wasn't secure, that I didn't understand the laws. And as an immigrant who was unhomed the moment I stepped off the plane, I didn't really have the ability to find quote unquote ground. Literally everything could not have gone worse. Everything was irritating. My panic attacks were massive. Once all of those issues were resolved, however, and I found myself being able to take a little bit of a break, I found friendship and I found camaraderie. I was able to work myself around the culture shock that was involved in the company. As I looked at the massive skyscrapers, as I visited the rivers, as I watched the oceans move in and out, that floating experience that I had initially had on the down curve started to come back. I found recovery. 4 or 5 weeks into my experience here in Australia, I started to feel like I had actually found ground. And that's the moment when the change had actually started to seep in. There are so many things in America that I miss. American chili and stew, the foods that I was so used to, the people I was used to seeing on a regular basis, the people that I love and have left behind. I can say that the biggest issue I had that brought home a lot of that homesickness had to do with chronemics. Now I have meetings with people in the UK and in America, but they're sandwiched on either end. That sandwich time and the advantage that I had about being able to meet with people between my 9 to 5 was gone. That's the moment that I started experiencing a tremendous amount of homesickness. For me to participate in my communities, I had to go out of my way to live community literally on the margins. Unfortunately, it also means that my presence and my participation in those communities has significantly reduced. I have felt a little bit removed from those spaces that I viewed as important. And it's here where I really want to talk about shit you don't want to talk about. Over the course of my W curve experience, I really struggled with a tremendous amount of concepts. And if I don't talk about them, it allows microaggressive problems to just fester until they become bigger problems that I have to resolve in therapy later. If we're not able to tackle these microaggressive intercultural issues like Black women and their experience in technology in the workplace, and the more we ignore our troughs and our crests, the worse they are going to get. That is exactly what shit you don't want to talk about is about. Having been in the country for now a month and a half, I can say that I am on the top half of what I know is the second time round on this W curve. And I'm going to spend 5 years becoming deeply entrenched in that Aussie lifestyle. That Aussie lifestyle is going to become a core aspect of my identity. And I also know that eventually I will have to find myself on the shores of the United States again. I will be able to see myself through it because I'm taking care of my mental well-being. I'm managing my social experiences, and I'm talking about these microaggressive issues that cause those troughs and those crests. So a special thank you to all of my patrons who have seen me through the financial health of this, especially you, Jen, over at Shit You Don't Want to Talk About. And I want to say thank you so much to all of you watching. I would love to hear in the comments a lot of experiences that you might have had that match W curve theory. Thank you so much for watching. And if you are interested in hearing a little bit more, this is the video about why I actually moved to Australia, starting my PhD. And our next video is going to be right here. It's going to be right here, and it's going to be about the 3 cultures of innovation.